The Overwatch League 2021 season is quickly approaching, and that can mean only one thing. It's time for some power rankings. Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Dolies, and you may be wondering why a channel that features virtually no Overwatch content, apart from the occasional stream, is doing a power ranking video. Well, the truth is, I constantly play Overwatch every chance I get. Plus, I'm a huge fan of the Overwatch League, watching since the inaugural season, and even watching Contenders, World Cup, and even Collegiate. And while I am but a mere high plat, low diamond tank player, I hope that my experience obsessing over this esport can convince you why my rankings might be right. Of course, it's hard to predict the future, especially in the league, as not only can changing metas throw everything into the air, roster changes and behind the scenes drama can put strong teams on the bottom. Just in the time it took making this video, there's already been multiple roster changes. So in order to compile my rankings, not only did I do an eye test for each team, but I also played through the entire season, pitting each team against each other and predicting the final scores for every regular season match. With that, I have a full ranking of both the East and West Division, which we'll go through separately, as well as the final overall rankings, which we'll get to at the end. And if you're curious about my predicted scores, I'll go over those each Wednesday in a recap video covering the weekend's matches. Now, let's get on with it. Starting off in the East Division, we have at number 8, the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, this should not be too much of a surprise to anybody. I think most people have the Valiant being at the bottom of pretty much everything. I have them at a 0-16 record. In fact, I don't expect the Valiant to win a single map until week 7. That's how little faith I have in this squad. We do see the return of Crystal and Waya, who were previously in the Overwatch League. Crystal was on both Hangzhou Spark and Guangzhou Charge. Waya was on Guangzhou Charge. Both these players are not bad. A lot of the squad is just not I don't have any problems with any of the particular members. I do have a question about Hybe, who is listed as an off-tank, and yet for the Valiant roster is listed as a support. So there's a question about him. NVM has been retired since late 2018, so there's a big question about whether or not he's ready to jump back into the tank role. And just kind of in general, this team doesn't look great, and for a region that's as stacked as the East Division is, they're going to struggle a lot. Next up at number 7, we have the New York Excelsior. Now, this is a team that has lost pretty much all of their members. We only see the return of Jonak and Bianca from last season, and you might be surprised to see them this far down with a record of 4-12. The big reason for this is the East Division is just that good, and honestly, a lot of the league is a lot better. This is a fairly young team. We've seen Yakpung and Ivy as well, and both of them are fairly good. I have no complaints about them. And honestly, a lot of this squad looks decent from what little I've seen of them in Contenders and whatnot. But the big question is just kind of how they're going to work together, how well the coaching staff is going to be able to get them to play together, and whether or not they can take some games off the top teams. This team, though, I do expect to be very aggressive. Yakpung and Ivy and Jonak, we've seen in the past being very aggressive players, so it should be a lot of fun to watch this team, despite the record. At number 6, we have the Guangzhou Charge. Now, with the same record as New York, I've decided to put Guangzhou just a little bit above New York, mainly because I love this tank line. Rio and Kron especially are highly underrated in my opinion, and bringing in Kariv and Mandu, Mandu was previously on New York, never really played though, but bringing in these supports, I'm really excited to see what the Charge can do. Again, the record and their placement really speaks volumes to how strong the East Division actually is, and while I have some questions about how Eileen rates compared to the rest of the Overwatch League in DPS, I am excited to see Mike Haley come in. I've been really impressed by him in the Contenders from what I've seen. And honestly, I think with Rio and Krong, this team should do good, but unfortunately, I just think there's better teams in the East Division. And coming in at number 5, we have the Chengdu Hunters. Now, this is an unpredictable team. Chengdu likes to do Chengdu things. They never like to play the meta, and when what they play works, they execute it very well. But unfortunately, when what they play doesn't work, they don't like change. They're going to play whatever they play, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Now that being said, I predict this team to be 8-8, but I could see Chengdu going to be number 1. It's hard to tell with this team, and they have a full roster. Now, one big thing to talk about, I don't really have anything negative to say about most of their players, other than, that kind of hesitancy to change, to switch. Yevdol, Jinmu, Leave, a lot of the same names we've seen. Elsa, Late Young, Ameng. We've seen a lot of these guys before, and I expect pretty much similar things. One big highlight for this team, though, is Gaga, the new tank player coming in, who is probably going to be the only main tank player playing this season. I hate to say it, but he looks fantastic, even on ball. So it's hard to tell what this team's going to do. I have high hopes for them, but I also am realistic that they might not be able to deal with what changes the top teams can throw at them. Another full rostered team. This time at number 4, it's the Hangzhou Spark. Now, I'm predicting that these guys will have the same record as the Chengdu Hunter at 8-8, but I expect that the Spark will be just slightly better. In all honesty, I like some of the players a little bit more for the Spark. They have very good tanks in Gushui and Bernard. Bernard being somebody that I was really high upon last year, but unfortunately just with London, it didn't work out. They've also picked up Somin Su, as well as some other supports, some other players in the supports role. But Somin Su is also very good with Architect and Godsby. I'm hoping to see some promise from this team. This is one of those teams that, again, I think they might be able to break into the top 3, but I have less faith in the Spark than the Hunters, strangely enough. But for me, the Spark is a little bit more consistent of a team. I like a lot of these players, especially, again, they have a very good tank line. From here on out in the East Division, I think any of the remaining teams could be number 1. But for the time being, I'm placing the Philadelphia Fusion at number 3 with a 12-4 record. I really like this roster. Unfortunately, Fusion has had some issues with visas. They've had to replace Funny Astro with Toby and Poco for Hoppa, just for the time being, and because of visa issues, of course. So hopefully we'll be able to see both of those players come back and, maybe get some playtime again. Especially Funny Astro. In my opinion, Funny Astro is one of, if not the best Lucios in the league. And with Alarm, who's one of, if not the best off support, these two are just terrifying support line. And with Carpe on DPS and bringing in Rascal especially, I'm really excited to see Rascal on this team because I think, in my opinion, EQO has always been a little bit lackluster. Rascal brings that flexibility playing Mei especially, as well as just kind of general flexibility of his hero pool, and I'm excited to see what he can do on this team. I know some people have been kind of cautious about Hoppa coming back, but Hoppa has been with the Fusion before, as well as played with Mono, their new main tank. So I'm not too worried about Hoppa taking Poco's place for the time being until visa issues are solved. So this is a team to look out for. I really do think they could make a run for number 1, especially in some of the tournaments. And now, last year's Grand Finals runner-up, we have the Seoul Dynasty coming in at number 2. Now again, this is a team that could make a run for first place, even overall. But with a record of 14-2, I expect them to kind of duke it out with Shanghai, who, spoiler alert, is going to be number 1. This team, they've trimmed down a lot of their roster, having only 2 supports with Onimo coming in for Toby. I kind of like that change. Onimo is a very good player and has worked with some of these other players such as Seobli, who they're bringing in on DPS. Now I'm really happy about that because they never had another Tracer player apart from Prophet. And so now it allows Prophet to play things like the Ashe while Seobli plays the Tracer. And I think that's going to make this team very good. They've upgraded Toyo from the two-way contract to be full-time on this roster, which I think is great if they play him, which I hope they do. I hope that we see Seoul switch out Marvel and Gesture for whatever purpose they need. Gesture looks great on Winston. Marvel is a great Reinhardt. And have Toyo play like the Zarya, something that Marvel was not as strong at. So if they can do that, I think this is a team that is going to be very strong. And finally, at number 1 in the East Division, we have the Shanghai Dragons. Now, this is probably not too much of a surprise to most people. I do have them having the same record as Seoul at 14-2. But again, any of these top 3 teams could be number 1. The reason that I'm putting Shanghai at the top spot is honestly mostly because of the tank line. We saw last season how strong Void is at the off-tank position. He is scary, to be honest. And they've gotten rid of both Stand 1 and Fearless in place for Fate. Now, Fate is a really good tank. I know a lot of people are kind of mad about him, but I love Fate. I think he's one of the most consistent tank players in the entire league, and he plays all the main tank roles. So I'm really excited to see this tank duo, what they can accomplish. You still have Izayaki and Lee Jae-young, who are both very good as well. They brought in Molly as another support, in case probably they want to play 2 off supports. And they've picked up Erster, which I'm kind of meh on, to be honest. But I do like it in the sense that Erster has a very good Mei. So if Mei comps become anything important, hopefully he will be able to get back to his first season with Atlanta rather than his last season performance, which was a little lackluster. So Erster has potential. I think maybe a new location might also help him out a little bit. And of course we have Fleta, Lip, and Diem, who have all proved themselves in the past. And from the top, we now return to the bottom for the West Division. At number 12, we have the Paris Eternal with a 1-15 record. Now, one thing I do want to sing the praises of for this team is actually a coach. And I don't like to talk about coaches because I don't know much of what goes on behind the scenes with the coaching staff. But the Paris Eternal has as a assistant coach J-Mac, who you might remember from, I believe it was Chengdu. He was a main tank player. J-Mac I've heard great things about with his coaching, giving players detailed reports on everything. So there's a lot to look forward to with that. But unfortunately, I just don't have much faith in this overall roster. The tank lineup is kind of meh. I'm not too big on Khan. Neptuno has always been pretty decent. And Onigan and Suna have been in the league before. They look fine. Naga, I'm not entirely sure about either. But all in all, I just don't know that this team is going to be... There's nothing screaming big enough potential to come out of the bottom. There is a lot of good teams in the West Division as well. So it's hard to tell if this team will be able to do anything or if they're just going to kind of fall flat. And coming in at number 11 with the same record as the Paris Eternal at 1-15, we have the Vancouver Titans. Now, once again, I'm not really down on any of the players specifically. In fact, with this team, I think Linkster and Dalton are both very good, with Linkster being amazing when he can pop off and have the opportunity on like his Widowmaker or Ashe. But with this team, one of the big problems I kind of see is I'm just kind of meh about a lot of their players. They're decent, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that any of the players are bad, but the tank line is not the greatest, and the support line is not the greatest. So it's really a question of whether or not these players can step it up, or if the roster can be kind of improved with some more star players for this team to come out from the bottom. But honestly, I don't see that happening, and I really do think that this is going to be another team that's going to be down to the bottom. The only reason I'm putting this team above Paris is because of that Linkster Dalton star potential, which I think is a little bit better than Oniga and Suna. And coming in at number 10 with a 3-13 record, we have the British Hurricane 2.0, aka the London Spitfire. Now, this team is mostly just the British Hurricane, which was a very good team in European contenders, being pretty much unbeaten for quite a while. But unfortunately, I just don't know that that's going to shine in the Overwatch League overall. We've already seen how previous contender teams kind of do in the league, and I don't have too much faith that this team is going to be much different than last year's second Vancouver Titans, I guess. But there are some really highlights here. Shax is the big one on that front. Shax is very good. But unfortunately, I'm kind of meh on Kelix. Kelix has been in the league quite a bit in previous seasons, and Blase just doesn't really do much for me. I don't think Blase is that great. So I see this team being kind of at the bottom, but I don't think they're going to be the rock bottom. And coming in at number 9, we have the Boston Uprising. Now, this is a team where we can start talking more about the positives than kind of being meh on most of the players. While this team I have being a 5-11 record, I am kind of excited about some of the players. Unfortunately for Boston, one of the players I was excited to see is no longer on the roster soon. And that kind of gives my opinion a little bit more of a sour taste. I still think they'll be number 9, but I have a little bit less hope that they can move up further. On the DPS, some of these players are not bad. Valentine has kind of impressed. I'm37 is okay, and Color Hex is okay, but I'm not super big on either of those two. What I do like and what I do love about this team is the support. Mungbong is really, really good, and Faith has looked pretty decent as well. And on tanks, I love Punk. Punk is one of the most underrated off-tanks in the league, I think. And bringing in Stan 1, I think, is a good improvement for them. Fusions wasn't bad first season that he was in the league, but he definitely kind of cooled off last season. And hopefully by having some competition, he'll get even better. I think Fusions can be a really good main tank. And hopefully with Stan 1 there's a little bit of competition so they can both improve. And this team might be halfway decent. Next up, we have the Atlanta Reign at number 8 with a 5-11 record. I do think that this team is going to be better than Boston despite having the same kind of record, mostly because I like most of these players better. We have Gator and Hawk on the tank lineup, which are both decent tanks. Nothing too great, nothing too bad, but they do have a lot of synergy. Masa and Iris, not entirely sure how to say his name, are great supports. But again, they kind of have a little bit lackluster. They don't have star potential. And Edison I have loved. Edison looks great. And they bring in Kai, who used to be known as KSP, who is also a very good hit scan player. Unfortunately, I'm not too big on Pelican. I've watched a little bit of Contenders and definitely some mental mistakes, and that's something that kind of worries me with this team, is making mental mistakes and very easy to correct problems that would otherwise lose them the game. The other thing that kind of worries me with this team is their DPS's flexibility. I'm a little bit worried about their hero pools. I'm not sure how well they're going to do if heavy projectile heroes come into play, like Fars. I don't know how well they'll be able to play those. So this is a team that I have high hopes for, but I'm reserving it because I think there's better teams in the West Division. On to number 7, we have the Houston Outlaws with a record of 7-9. Now, this team has the most DPS players listed on their roster as any team, with 5 DPS players and then 2 supports, 2 tanks. That's kind of crazy, but I like the DPS that they have. Dante and Happy especially are phenomenal. Dante is probably one of the most underrated Tracer players, and overall just very flexible. And Happy is scary on Widowmaker and Ashe. They also have KSF and Hydration. As I don't really expect to see Jake too much, he's kind of made that clear in the offseason that he's not going to play all that much, but he is available if they need him. But Hydration and KSF, while not the best projectile players that are in the league, are still decent enough that I think their DPS lineup is not anything to worry about. What I do worry about is Juby on support and Piggy and Jonggu on tank. Juby is the only player that has come straight from Collegiate, and while that is great, I really feel like he's a little bit untested to this level of the Overwatch League. And Piggy and Jonggu are Korean, being on a mixed roster team. Now, they do have the synergy from being teammates before, but it's kind of up in the air on how good they're going to be for the league. And last but not least, Crimzo, I think, is a really good off support. But I do think that he is just kind of a little bit above average, but kind of average for that support role. So this is a team that has high hopes, but I'm kind of hedging my bets on this team. And coming in at number 6 in the West Division, we have the Toronto Defiant. Surprising, I know. I'm actually looking forward to this team. I have really high hopes for them. With a record of 9-7, this is a solid team. The let's talk about the tanks first of all. Sato and Michelle, especially, which are the ones I'm expecting them to play, are really good. Sato coming from Philly Fusion, Michelle coming from Seoul Dynasty. Michelle didn't get much playtime last season, but has shown to be a pretty decent off tank, and Sato is a very good main tank. They also have Beast in the sidelines if they need him. I think Beast he has the potential to be very good, but we just haven't seen that out of him. The other really bright spot with this team is the DPS. Logix and Hisu are very, very good. Logix has proved time and time again that no matter what team he's on, he can pop off. And Hisu, again coming from Philly, has shown very, very good play, especially on his Sombra. We also have, I don't know how to say his name, but NA First, who has been in contenders and actually looks really good. The big question I have is the support lineup. Aztec, Ansun J, mostly are the ones that I'm kind of up in the air about. Lastro was previously on the Valiant and is a very solid main support, especially on his Lucio. So I don't have too many questions about him, but the big thing with this team is kind of questioning their supports and how it's all going to come together. I have high hopes for this team. I hope they don't let me down this year. And speaking of teams that routinely disappoint, coming in at number 5, we have the Dallas Fuel, with a record of 10-6. Now, I joke, but also not really. The Dallas Fuel have such potential sometimes, but something always seems to go wrong. And this season is no different, apparently. Recently, Exi, who was a DPS player, mainly a hit scan player, has retired due to injuries, which is completely understandable. But now they only have Doha and Sparkle. And for the record, most of this team is a old, I believe it was Element Mystic team. I'm not entirely sure on that one, so don't hold me to that. But I like Doha and Sparkle. I'm a little bit worried about their flexibility. I think Doha is probably going to have to step up and take the place of the hit scan. Sparkle, I love seeing him on Genji especially, but unfortunately that's probably not going to happen. Genji, Pharah, projectile heroes are his best. Unfortunately, he's probably going to have to play Tracer, and that's not going to be great. The supports I love, Fielder and Repel especially, and I think Jesuke is also pretty good. He's not bad. He's definitely had some struggles in the past. And for the tanks, Fearless and Hanbin. I love Hanbin. I think he is a very good off tank. Fearless is pretty decent. He definitely proved himself last season. So there is some concerns with this team. I definitely see this team could go down farther, especially after the loss of Exi. Unfortunately, I made this before he announced his retirement, but it happens. So yeah, definitely kind of wait and see with this team. And again, for the West Division, from here on out, we're going to have teams that could all vie for the top position. But for the time being, I'm putting the Washington Justice at number 4 with a 12-4 record. Now, the big reason for this is because I'm a little worried about their flexibility on DPS. Don't get me wrong, Decay is amazing at DPS, and Assassin also looks pretty good. Tuba has shown to be decent as well. And while Jerry did bail Boston out of troubled spots a lot last year, I'm a little bit worried about how good he is. I don't think he's that good. The support lineup is also kind of a question. Closer, who has actually been around since the first season, and Bebe are both pretty good, but are not the best support line. They definitely are a little bit lackluster when trying to vie for that top spot. What I really like about this team is the tank lineup. Mag is amazing. Mag is a very good main tank, and I've always been pretty impressed with Rhea. Unfortunate with last season, Rhea was on the Hangzhou Spark and had injuries as well, so that's unfortunate. But with Rhea and Fury, I think the tank lineup is pretty solid. So it's just a question of whether or not this team can kind of gel well enough to take the top spot. Unfortunately, they're going to have some really big competition. You know, if you went back in time and asked somebody in the first season of Overwatch League who they thought would be the top teams in a couple of years, nobody would ever say Shanghai and Florida. But lo and behold, it seems that these two teams have really changed things around. At number 3, I have the Florida Mayhem with a 13-3 record. Again, this is a team that could go for the top spot, and I was a little bit undecided on whether I wanted to put them at 3 or 2. The reason that I'm putting them at 3 rather than 2 is because of their tank lineup. While I love Gargoyle as an off-tank, I'm a little bit worried about OG. Previously, Mayhem had Fate as a main tank, and if they still had Fate, I would love this lineup. But OG is a little bit more inconsistent than Fate is. I don't think OG is bad, necessarily, but he definitely has issues with consistency. He either pops off or he feeds. But things that I love about this team, and probably the biggest thing, is Gundam Jin and Slime, I think, is one of the best support lineups in the entire league. These two are scary together. And BQB has continued to show that he is very good at the hit scan. He's really stepped up his game. And with Yaki, I love Yaki. Yaki is fantastic. And bringing in Checkmate, Checkmate has looked great as well. So I'm not worried about their DPS. I'm definitely not worried about their supports. The tank lineup has me questioning whether or not they can be the top team. But this is definitely a team that could make a run for the Grand Champion. And at number 2, we have the Los Angeles Gladiators. Unlike their other Los Angeles team, I have really high hopes for this team. With a record of 14-2, this is another one that I really think could make a run for the top spot. Heavily because of the support line. Shu and Moth are really good. Moth, coming from the Shock last season, is a little bit lackluster in the Lucio department, I think. I think that is his one weakness. But if Brig ever comes into the meta, Moth is by far the best Brig player there is. The DPS look great. Birdring, Mirror, Kevster, they really haven't changed much with that squad. And I'm really happy to see Birdring back. He is a very good player. Mirror and Kevster need to step it up just a little bit if they want to be that top team. They need to help Birdring kill everybody, basically. But what I absolutely love with this team is the tanks. Space is, in my opinion, the best Western off-tank there is. He is so good, and arguably one of the best off-tanks in the world. Probably like third. And Muse has looked really good as well. So I'm really excited about this team. I think that they're going to do well. I just don't know if they're going to be able to break into that number 1 spot at all, because they have some very fierce competition. And of course, that competition is the San Francisco Shock. I don't think it is going to surprise anybody that I think that the number 1 spot in the West Division is the Shock, with a 16-0 record. Now, I want to make something very clear. I don't think that the Shock are actually going to go 16-0, but I don't know who on paper they're going to lose against. It could be somebody like the Outlaws that's happened in the past. It's probably going to be one of those one-off team kind of just gets the upper hand on them. But this team is scary. So the tank lineup has not changed from last year. We still have Super, Smurf, and Choyobin. I personally think that Choyobin is one of the best Korean off-tanks. I think Void might be the best off-tank in the world, but that's debatable. And Choi has been pretty good. He's definitely consistent. And with Super and Smurf on the main tank, I think both of them are good. Despite how little I actually like Super, I don't like going to, I don't want to inflate his ego more, but he is very good. For the supports, Violet is scary. Violet is probably one of the best off supports right now, especially when he pulls out the Baptiste. FD God replaced Moth, which I think is a good decision. FD God is definitely a better Lucio, and I kind of expect to see Lucio comps more this season. But his Brig is definitely a lot worse. And then they have Twilight in the back. I don't expect to see Twilight unless we see a lot of double off supports. Now, for the DPS, they still have Striker, which is great. Striker is probably the best Tracer player in the entire world right now. And they've picked up Nero and Glister. Unfortunately, they lost Ance, and that is probably the one thing that I think is the weakness of the Shock. Ance was amazing, but Teo is also pretty good, so I have good hopes for that, but I do think that this team is beatable. Glister and Nero are both more projectile heroes, and I'm not super big on Nero. I think Nero is very good, don't get me wrong, but compared to some of the top teams, I don't know that Nero is the best player to have in that projectile spot. So this is a team that I fully expect will probably win the West Division and might even go for a third championship. but I do think that they can be knocked off. And with that, this is the final league rankings. I don't know what to expect with how the final rankings are actually going to be determined, but this is kind of how I rank all of the teams together, East and West. And at the bottom, I have Los Angeles Valiant. That one kind of goes without question in my mind. And then from there, I kind of just place the teams. I kind of placed the East Division teams in where I thought they'd go. There's not too much exciting to talk about. I think New York is better than London, but potentially not better than Boston. That might change. 15th, 16th might change because of the loss of Soon for Boston. But I think that Guangzhou Charge, despite having a worse record than the Atlanta Reign, are a little bit better. I like the team comp a little bit better. Chengdu at 11th above the Houston Outlaws. Again, Chengdu can do Chengdu things. Who knows what they're going to end up doing? They could be number 1 for all I know. They could also be number 19th. So there's a lot of questions about Chengdu. But I think overall, Toronto is a little bit better of a team than them, whereas Hangzhou is a little bit better of a squad than Toronto. Hangzhou has a pretty good squad overall, but I do worry about how they compare to some of the top teams. And I think Dallas is that team that's kind of at the cusp of really good or really bad. They're kind of the gatekeeper to the top 7. And in all honesty, the top 7, it's hard to tell which way that they're going to go. I think that Washington Justice could be number 1, and Shanghai could be number 7. It's really hard to tell with the top 7 who's going to be where. But for now, what I've done is I think the Philadelphia Fusion has a much stronger squad than the Washington Justice, mostly because of the DPS, whereas Florida, I think, has an overall better team than Philly. With the exception of the main tank role in OG, I have concerns about. And then I kind of think that Seoul is going to be sneaked in between the Gladiators and the Shock, mostly because I kind of worry about the Gladiators' DPS. They are very good, but there's a little bit of concern with that. Whereas Seoul has a much stronger DPS line, and tanks and supports comparatively are similar enough. I do think the Shock are going to be better than Seoul Dynasty. That is mostly due, honestly, to Striker. Striker is a very good Tracer player, and I expect to see a lot of Tracer this season. But I do think that the Shanghai Dragons might be able to come out on top. And again, that's kind of my prediction. I totally didn't want to just not put the Shock at number 1. I'd love to see a different team win it all. And I think Shanghai could. Again, I think that the top 7 teams could win the entirety of the league over any other team. So it's going to be hard to predict how things play out, but we'll kind of see as we go. And I'm going to keep with this league ranking, but it's hard to tell at the end of the day. And that's it. My power rankings for the Overwatch League 2021 season. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I do plan on making weekly recaps for the games every Wednesday, so look forward to that, as they will include my predicted scores. And a lot of hard work went into this video, so if you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments. I'd especially enjoy to hear your thoughts on who's going to be the top team this season, who you're rooting for, and if you disagree with me. I'd love to hear it all. So that's it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!